We know the Royals have had a busy offseason, but are they done adding? Let's find out in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can give me a follow on Twitter or X, whatever you call it, at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcasting links, whether that be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts. We're also on Odyssey, and you can check us out on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. We're about 110 subscribers away from 1,000, which is our goal for opening day 2024. So keep subscribing. If you already have, send it to somebody who hasn't subscribed to this YouTube channel. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Make sure you are taking care of all the right auto parts guaranteed with eBay Motors, and we're going to have more on them coming up in about 15 minutes or so. Again, easy to follow us on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Easy to find us on TikTok and Instagram at locked_on_Royals. And additionally to that, if you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me, well, I work in sports here in Kansas City at Sports Radio 810 WHB. So I talk all things sports, not just baseball, here in the local market. But when you click on this podcast, you know that you are getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball, whether it's in the offseason or we're in full swing in the regular season, which now just under a month away from when pitchers and catchers report, which I'm sure everybody is super stoked for if you follow the Kansas City Royals, or I guess any Major League Baseball team, because you can't wait for the weather to warm up and watch your baseball team play on the diamond. Well, I know it's been a while since the Royals have added a significant piece to their Major League roster. They went through those flurry of moves right after the winter meetings, getting Seth Lugo, getting Michael Wacha, getting Will Smith, Chris Stratton, Hunter Renfroe. It felt like every other day the Royals were adding a piece to their 2024 roster. So it begs the question of, are they done adding? I've gotten this question a lot over the last couple weeks or so, just because it's a great question, number one, and it's a very valid question. Nobody really knows what this team is going to look like officially until they break camp in surprise and head to Northwest Arkansas for their exhibition game. Outside of that, we don't really know. We don't know every single spot, how it's going to look. We don't really know how official the lineup's going to look. We can all make our projections, right? But I always love to make my final projections until we get the roster, the 26-man roster. Now, I don't want to be a total hypocrite. I've already made my projection. We had a podcast episode on that last week, I believe it was. Last week on Tuesday, I think it was, projecting the opening day roster. However, I still want to hold my breath for another bullpen piece or maybe another utility bat they want coming off the bench. Those are all valid things that we need to think about, that we need to look at and go, okay, now I can start penciling in guys to the number 2 spot in the lineup or the number 4, the 5, the 6, so on and so forth. Overall, I would say that this roster is all but set. I do not envision another huge move being made. I think they're still testing the waters, but the chunk of their work, a lot of that workload has already happened. They have overhauled the rotation, right? They have overhauled the bullpen. They have added the bat to the lineup. They may want to add one more, but the spots are filling up. Let's be honest. There might be 1 or 2 spots left for J.J. Picollo to add to this team. Other than that, it's this group and we're ready to go. That's going to be, I think, the takeaway going into spring training. We did all the heavy lifting back in the middle to end part of December. Now, I remember J.J. Picollo saying that after those moves, that if they were closer to spring training, they would be done. But they were still going to try to evaluate a lot of players out there. I mean, hell, tons of great players are still unsigned, but do any of them make sense or fit the market, fit the price for the Kansas City Royals? There are absolutely guys they can afford. Do not get mistaken by that. And I am not going to rule out another bullpen piece. I'm not going to even rule out another trade. I don't think they would trade one of their everyday starters, because at that point, you have progressed this entire offseason expecting those guys to start. They expect MJ to be their starting left fielder. They expect Isbell to be in center, Massey at second. They expect Renfroe to be their right fielder and Nelson Velasquez to be the DH. Things can always change. You want to have good depth, and you want to make sure if there are injuries, you are taken care of. I just don't know if I see a guy out there that significantly helps this team. Matt Chapman had been thrown out because David Lesky with Inside the Crown does fantastic work. Go subscribe and read all of his stuff. It's fascinating. And he had a piece on the Royals kind of being linked and interested in adding a third baseman. And in that case, that would shift Michael Garcia over to second base and make Michael Massey and Nick Lofton the odd man out. The options there would be a Matt Chapman, a Gio Urshela. Those feel like the two runaways at that point. And then there would be a pretty significant fall off at that point. Matt Chapman, I think, is the prized piece over at third base coming off his year in Toronto. He also is going to want a big-time contract. And does it make sense to give him that deal when you already have Michael Garcia at third? I answered it this way on Twitter or X. Again, I'm not going to, pick how you want to say it. You can call it Twitter X, whatever you want to. But I said something along the lines of, Matt Chapman makes this team better. You can't deny that. He is an upgrade at third base because Michael Massey would be bumped out of the lineup and Michael Garcia is moving over there, which he is an upgrade. So you're upgrading, I think, at third a little bit, and you're certainly upgrading at second base. The price, though, is where I would stop a little bit and go, is that worth it? Because how much better does does Matt Chapman make this lineup? Better, worth a 4-year, somewhere between 17 and 20 million a year? Not sold on that. And I like Michael Garcia a lot over at third base. And I do think Michael Massey bounces back a little bit at second. And if not, I'm ready to see Nick Lofton get some run over on the right side of the infield. It just doesn't feel like they are seriously hunting for another bat. And that's not knocking J.J. Picollo with this front office. I think they really like the group they have. If they were to add a Gio Urshela or Matt Chapman, they might start propelling themselves a little bit more into the top spot in the AL Central, maybe neck and neck with Detroit at that point. I just think a lot of it comes down to pitching. This team can be really fun if that rotation is what they paid for and the bullpen stabilizes. You've heard me say that multiple times on the podcast episodes before. I like the way it's shaping out a little bit. So for those that are wondering and asking themselves, is this really the team? Are there more spots to be filled? I think there's going to be some minor league deals handed out. We saw them last week give a minor league deal to Sandy Leon just to give them some catching depth going into Surprise. I'd imagine there's going to be a couple more minor league deals for bullpen guys. Don't be shocked if they make a waiver claim or two for a bullpen arm out there. These are all things that are good to do before you get to spring training and start evaluating every single guy on your roster. But in terms of the 2-year deals, 3-year deals, 4-year deals, I think something would have happened by now, to be honest with you. And maybe it's how the market is playing out. It's been very slow. Bullpen arms are not flying off the shelves. Former Royal Aroldis Chapman just signed a $10.5 million deal with Pittsburgh. Outside of Jordan Hicks and Josh Hader, none of the top guys have been flying off the boards. Phil Maton's still out there. Ryan Stanek's still out there. Hector Neris, 3 Astros right there that would really make the bullpen better. But they're still waiting it out there. And I don't think that those guys are going to want to wait till after pitchers and catchers report. For now, though, I think my final answer is they are done adding. Until I hear anything different, until we get some more smoke where it can lead to fire, this feels like the roster that's in place, and they're holding out a bullpen spot for somebody to win it in spring training, and maybe a bench spot or two could be opened up for a free agent, or they want competition at that spot as well. All right, for our next segment, I want to dive into spring training a little bit. We're going to be down there for a few days in Surprise, and I'm going to be looking for certain things, some position battles, and what I hope to see with this ball club, as they'll be there for about a month and a half before coming back to Kansas City and taking on the Minnesota Twins on opening day. That's next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I am your host, Jack Johnson. Give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15, and check us out on wherever you get your podcasts: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. Before we go any further, let's give a shout out to the title sponsor today in eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Going into spring training, there's a lot of things you want to uncover. There's a lot of position battles to be had. There's going to be players that pop off in spring training. There's going to be stars that don't play as well. It's all about getting the work in. It's all about getting the repetition, making sure that you are healthy and ready to go when you join the regular season. You're ready for opening day. Place is going to be packed. You just want to make sure you get your reps in. I think everybody understands that with spring training. As long as it's been around, the fan in you has been told, do not buy into much with spring training. The Royals always seem to win in spring training. They win the Cactus League a handful of times, and you buy in a little bit. And there's been some awful, awful Royals teams win the Cactus League. It's just the way they play. Maybe it's the comfort. Maybe it's the temperature. Maybe it's because the younger guys, they're more seasoned than the prospects that play in spring training. It's all about making sure you get your work in, you stay healthy, you get ready for the regular season. However, I have always taken the approach of, though, for a lot of guys, spring training isn't that important. It's more so of just, getting your legs back under you. It is important for guys trying to make the team. It's their tryout. Position battles, bench battles, bullpen battles, rotation battles, those all matter at the end of the day. Because you got to go off something, right? You can pay a guy the big bucks, but if he comes out there and just completely tanks it in spring training, maybe you make him your number 3 instead of your number 1 going into opening day. Now, I think the number 1 pitcher in this rotation, the opening day starter, is either going to be Michael Wacha or Cole Ragans. Even if Cole Ragans is the opening day starter, I don't think he's going to be touted as the number 1 until he's proven, hey, I am going to give you somewhere between 180, 190 innings. We've discussed this before. He's never shown it. He's never had a full season at the big league level as a starter. You don't just peg that guy as the number 1, which is why I think Michael Wacha is going to be the number 1. Bobby Witt Jr. has his spot at short. Vinny Pasquantino's got his spot at first base. Salvador Perez has it locked down behind the plate. Isbell is going to be starting in center. Michael Garcia is going to be at third. MJ Melendez is going to be in left. After that, I guess I should say Renfroe is going to be in right field because I already said that in today's episode. Outside of that, there could be some debate as to who they're going to go with. I am fascinated to see how the second base position plays out. I think Michael Massey is better than people think he is. He's got a good launch angle, and I think he's got some power in that bat. And I think it's going to be the approach that has to come around. But I trust, based off his minor league numbers, that can change a little bit. You have more comfort after seeing big league pitching for an entire year. Now he's had about a year and a half at the big league level. So there is some maturity to his game now, where Nick Lofton is the young pup. He's not much younger than Michael Massey, but he's the young pup. He's only got 20 games under his belt, and I'm very curious to see how the Royals play that. If they go into surprise and say, it's Michael Massey's job, we're not giving it to anybody else. Nick Lofton's going to be a big part of our team, but not just yet. I'm very curious to see how that all goes down, how Matt Quatraro handles that position. Because I know the Royals like Michael Massey a lot. And I do think Massey's going to bounce back in the same way MJ Melendez is going to bounce back. And those are guys the Royals need to bounce back. You need Massey to be good. You need Melendez to be good. You need Isbell to be good. Because Bobby Witt Jr., Maikel Garcia, Vinny Pasquantino, Salvi, those guys are going to be just fine. Your lineup comes together when those guys become either just slightly below average hitters or average to slightly above average hitters. Those are all things you're going to be looking for. The next thing I'm going to be interested with is how they handle Daniel Lynch. We had an episode on him last week. I want to know what the idea is for him, how you can make him a valuable piece to this team. Because right now, simply put, there's no room in the rotation. And we know how the first month of the season goes. You've got a couple of off days, so that fifth starter doesn't really get a start until the second week, sometimes even the third week. So the Royals are going to have Waka, Reagans, Lugo, Singer, likely all making their starts. And maybe you push Lyles back a week or two. And that's what I'm getting at here, is that those are the five guys right now. Unless they make a move to dump some money with Jordan Lyles onto somebody else, package a prospect with him, then it's going to be those five. Daniel Lynch is going to have to fight for that last bullpen spot. And is he a bullpen pitcher? That's my big question. Do you make him the long reliever? I guess it's up for debate. It can certainly be considered. It's how they're going to use him, though. I'd imagine he's going to get starts and he's going to get work out of the bullpen. That's how it works in spring training, especially if you don't really have footing at a specific spot. That's what I'm going to be looking for with Daniel Lynch. And if Kris Bubic was healthy, same thing. Kris Bubic is going to take some time before he's getting some work in to get back to the big league level. I don't think we're going to see Kris Bubic until maybe June, late June, early July. It takes a little bit of time to rehab and build that arm back up, get some innings in the minor league. I don't think there's a need to rush Kris Bubic either. The third thing I'm looking to is kind of that fourth outfielder spot, if I'm being honest with you. And we broke it down before. I mean, you got Drew Waters, switch hitter. There's upside, good defense, good power, at least raw power. You've got Dairon Blanco, who's been fantastic in winter ball this offseason. He's one of the fastest guys on the team. He's good defensively, had the highest WAR among all the fourth outfielders last year in Kansas City, I should further say that. And then you got Tyler Gentry, who you added to your 40-man roster. I'm not sold there's a spot for him in AAA Omaha anymore. He's kind of too good for AAA Omaha. I could also see the point of he's not going to play every day in Kansas City. There's no use taking at bats away from him when he can continue to get work in Omaha. I'd get that. So it comes down to me between Waters and Blanco. I've said this before. I think Dairon Blanco makes this team right now better. Can't, scoff at his hitting. I think his hitting is just fine. His speed is electric. I think the baseball savviness, the IQ has to be better to put him in big-time moments like the bottom of the ninth inning, down one run, and you're pinch running. We saw a couple of toot blands that he had last year that cost the team runs. Can't have that. Can't have that when you've got that type of speed. Waters may not be better for this team now, but maybe better in the long term, in the future. We just haven't seen it yet. So those three things I'm very interested to see how it plays out. A lot of position battles, but spring training is for position battles. It's fun to see how those things are going to go down. And the Locked On Royals podcast will be down in Surprise a few days before their first team workout. So we'll have plenty of coverage, video. We'll be live tweeting. We'll get some interviews. Going to be a very fun couple of days down in Surprise, Arizona, where the weather is a hell of a lot warmer than it is in Kansas City right now. Before we move on to our final segment, I want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. When we return, I just brought up Kris Bubic. Do I think he's going to be the same player when he returns? We'll talk about it next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Also, give us a follow on TikTok and Instagram at locked_on_Royals. And find us on wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. We're about 110 subscribers away from 1,000. So get us to our goal by opening day 2024. We know one guy is not going to be on the opening day roster, and he was in the rotation last year on opening day, and that is Kris Bubic, who is recovering from Tommy John surgery. He got hurt, I think, 3 or 4 starts into the year. Was the Royals' best pitcher until that point. I guess I should say starter, because I'll give that honor to Aroldis Chapman, who was the team's best pitcher in the first part of the season. Kris Bubic was the guy, though, in the rotation. He was Brian Sweeney's, I guess, blueprint to show that, hey, I can fix guys on this staff. Gave Kris Bubic a slider. Kris Bubic was coachable. He used that slider. It made him a better pitcher. Then, of course, as a lot of things did for the Royals in 2023, went wrong. Things had to go wrong. They lost 106 games. There's no way everything goes right and you lose that many games. Kris Bubic was one of the guys I think that everybody was excited to see pitch all year long because of how he looked in April. But baseball happens sometimes. And you're going to have injuries. And Kris Bubic had an injury, and it resulted in his season being ended abruptly. And now we enter a point where Kris Bubic isn't really being thought of as a rotational guy. If he was healthy, if he was ready to go by spring training, he probably has the inside job as the number 5 instead of Jordan Lyles. Daniel Lynch is going to be fighting for that spot. But again, I think the Royals are going to give Jordan Lyles that spot from the get-go. And Jordan Lyles as the number 5 is a lot more trustworthy than Jordan Lyles as a number 2, which is what he was last year, basically. Or 2, number 3. That's how thin this starting rotation was. I do believe Kris Bubic gets back to Kansas City. I mentioned that in our second segment. I think June or July makes a lot of sense. There's just no need to rush him. It's also going to come down to how this season is going, right? If the Royals are winning and the rotation looks good, let's say Jordan Lyles is pitching like he did in Baltimore before he came over to Kansas City, then you're not just going to throw Kris Bubic in the rotation when there's no need to at that point in time. It's also not ideal to throw a guy in the rotation if they're losing, just as much as they did in 2023. It kind of feels like you can ease them in the same way the Royals eased in Chris Medlin in 2015. Different team, different bullpen, different rotation. But they looked at it as, we think he can be valuable to this team. And when they called him up to Kansas City, I believe it was a spot start or 2. You know, it kind of slowly built his arm back up. They had a big cushion in the Central, so they were able to do that. But I liked the way that he was available for about a month or so. And they still let him work it out in Omaha, get his innings in, build that arm, then brought him to Kansas City. That's the way it usually goes down with guys coming off Tommy John. The last thing you want to do is have a guy immediately become available, right? His arm's built up a little bit, and you go, all right, boom, join the rotation. Don't care what our record is. Just join the rotation. Not the smart thing to do. I think Kris Bubic could be eased in the bullpen, in long relief, when games are blowouts, when you've got a big lead, when you're trailing by a lot. See where the velocity is at. Because Kris Bubic can't be in this rotation if his velocity and his stuff is back to 2022 form. Right? We saw in 2023 a totally different version. That slider had tremendous bite and horizontal movement. The curveball was being set up perfectly. The changeup looked good. The fastball was being well located, had good spin rate, and it was 94, 95, 96, different version of him. Now, you also had to factor in Tommy John surgery can take some of the velocity away. And that is something I am expecting. If he comes back and he's working 90 to 91, I don't think his command's going to be good enough or his stuff is going to play well enough to be in this rotation, even if Jordan Lyles is struggling. There's just other guys you can give starts to. That's the cruel world of baseball. Everybody knows it. You can't just give spots to guys because you feel bad for what happened to them the year before. If Jordan Lyles isn't this team's number 5 by May, they're going to look at Daniel Lynch. They're going to look at Alec Marsh. They're going to look at Veneziano. They're going to look at Bolin. Maybe if they tear it up in AAA, you look at somebody like a Chandler Champlain or a Mason Barnett. If they progress to AAA Omaha, which is very unlikely in the first month of the year, I'd imagine they'll be down in AA for a chunk of this season. You know, Christian Chamberlain, who was seen at Tread, pumping 97 with ridiculous spin. I don't know. The number 5 spot is where you're just hoping to get a little something. You don't need to be flawless every 5th day. You give your team 5 innings, 3 earned runs, move on. That's fine for my number 5. It really is. And Jordan Lyles for now is the guy. Then it's going to be a slew of guys that are in line. And Kris Bubic will get his chance. He will get his crack at it. It's just going to be delayed a little bit. It's going to take some time. And when it takes time, there could be guys that have already taken that spot and run with it. That's what's going against him. I hope the stuff is going to be there. I still think he can be a damn good pitcher for Kansas City, whether it's in the rotation or the bullpen. It's just going to be a delayed start. And coming off Tommy John, it's tough to predict what a pitcher is going to look like. Hope the best for Kris Bubic. We just won't know for quite some time. All right, before we say goodbye, one last shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Tomorrow, we are going to dive a little bit more into some of the guys the Royals have been looking into. I want to go a little bit more into Christian Chamberlain and what he was doing at Tread, and if he's maybe a long shot to make this team being a non-roster invite, and much more Royals news that'll be coming up. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.